Welcome to the Practical NLP Podcast with me, Andy Smith. Presuppositions. These are linguistic assumptions, what you have to take as being true in order to understand or make sense of what's being said. Pretty much everything you say, everything you hear, everything you read has presuppositions in it, which influence the internal representations of the listener or your internal representations if you're listening to someone else. Presuppositions are useful for both recognizing what's assumed in what someone says and assisting in creating internal representations for other people. We've already come across the presuppositions of NLP, what you have to assume to be true or act as if they're true in order to get NLP to work for you. Let's look in more detail at the different kinds of presuppositions that can show up in everyday language and how to spot them. This will enable you to read between the lines of what someone is saying and give you information about their map of the world that the average person would miss. It will also enable you, with practice, to be able to structure and sequence the internal representations of people you talk with, manage, coach, or write for in a way that will help you to get your message across, influence and develop people in the most effective way. Most people aren't aware of how the presuppositions in their language impact the effectiveness of their message. Sometimes they'll undermine what they want to say without even realizing it. As you practice and get better at using presuppositions with awareness and intention, you'll find that your ability to get your message across, to influence people, to manage and develop people, gets better and better. Being aware of the presuppositions in your language and being able to use them effectively will make a massive difference to your ability to get results with NLP. So, presuppositions are things that you have to assume are true in order to make sense of what the person is saying, but they're not explicitly stated in words. If someone says to you, "I only closed the deal on the 4th meeting," you instantly know how many meetings they've had, and that the deal wasn't closed in the first 3. They don't have to explicitly say, "I had 4 meetings and I didn't close the deal in the first 3, but I did in the 4th one." You know that there were 3 previous meetings, because the word 4th presupposes that. You've probably heard the saying that when you assume something, it makes an ass out of you and me. To get better results than that, we need to be able to distinguish between what's definitely presupposed in what a person is saying and assumptions that we might make that would lead us to interpret their statement in a certain way that isn't necessarily what they meant. How do we recognize when presuppositions are being used? There are a number of different kinds, each with its own tip-off or giveaway or linguistic marker that alerts you that the presupposition is there. Let's briefly look at some examples for each kind so that you can identify it easily. The first kind of presupposition is the presupposition of existence, presupposing that a certain thing exists, and the tip-off for it is the presence of nouns or people or places. Listen to these examples. The management noticed Richard's ability early on. The management only just noticed Richard's ability. The management didn't notice Richard's ability. What's interesting about this is that each time I said one of those, you had to accept the idea of Richard's ability in order to make sense of the sentence. I didn't even have to say, "Richard has this ability and it was noticed early on." Just mentioning the noun ability, almost in passing, while your attention was on Richard and the management, was enough to presuppose that it did, in fact, exist. So presuppositions are able to create internal representations in the listener's mind, or put ideas in people's heads, as we say in everyday English, while the conscious attention of the listener, and hence any resistance they might have, is displaced elsewhere in the sentence. Of course, if someone sits down and thinks about it, they could say, "Hang on, who says that he actually has this ability?" But more than likely their attention will be shifted to the other elements in the sentence. Notice also how it doesn't matter if there's a negative in the sentence. In order to make sense of "they didn't notice Richard's ability," you still have to accept the existence of the ability almost without thinking of it. Whether or not the sentence is positive or negative in nature, the effect of the presupposition of existence is still the same. Presuppositions of existence can be very useful in questions, especially open questions. If someone asks a closed question, have you had any benefits from studying this material so far? You could answer no, even if there have been lots of benefits, but it's just taking you a while to think what they are. On the other hand, when you ask the open question, what benefits have you had from studying this material so far? It presupposes that there have been some, and it makes it easier for you to find them and bring them to your conscious attention. This is a very useful structure to remember if you're doing coaching or if you're doing assessment or gathering feedback, which at the same time can also embed learning or get customers to realize just how much they've got from your product or service. Now, presuppositions of possibility or necessity. The tip-off for presuppositions of possibility or necessity is the presence of modal operators. Modal operators are words like should, shouldn't, ought, got to, have to, must, mustn't. Modal operators of necessity, or can, can't, could, couldn't, which are modal operators of possibility. Listen to this example. Sooner or later, Sarah needs to realize that she can close the deal. There are two modal operators in that sentence. Needs to, which is a modal operator of necessity, it must happen, and can, which implies possibility. You could just say to Sarah, Sarah, you can close the deal. To which she could easily say, no, I can't, if she actually doesn't believe that she can close it. If you say, when are you going to realize that you can close the deal? Her attention will be shifted to the question of when she's going to realize, and she'll be more likely to accept that it's possible that she can close it. The great thing about presuppositions of possibility or necessity is that when you hear someone use these modal operators, they're giving you clues as to their beliefs about the rules they operate by, what they must do, what they mustn't do, what they should do even if they're not doing it, and what they think is possible or impossible. These rules are important because they guide the person's behavior. Very often the beliefs about what they should do, what they must do, what they can't do, turn out to be false and limiting and just holding them back. Whole schools of therapy have grown up around getting people to realize and rethink their musts, shoulds, oughts, and can'ts. When you hear these presuppositions in what someone is saying, you can subtly use more empowering presuppositions just in conversation to help them expand the limits of their mental maps. When you hear a lot of shoulds, can'ts, got tos, and musts, that's usually a person who's experiencing themselves as being at the effect end of things rather than at the cause end of things. And one of the ways that they keep that going is by the presuppositions in what they say and what they say to themselves in their internal dialogue. If you want to use a presupposition of possibility in a question, the format how can we or how could we is very useful to get people thinking and coming up with ideas. It presupposes that whatever comes after that question opening is in fact possible. You can even use a presupposition of necessity in order to open up a sense of possibility. What do we need to do to gain a share of this market? Presupposes that it's possible to gain a share of the market, and will displace attention onto what we need to do, which is really where your attention wants to be, if you want to do something about it, rather than on is it possible at all. The next type of presupposition is cause and effect. The tip-off for this is the verb to make or to cause, or implied causatives of the form if, then, or just the word because. Cause and effect makes a linkage between two internal representations, labels one a cause and the other an effect, and says this one causes that one, or if you do this one, that one will happen. Let's have some examples. The tightening market made him up his game. One of the reasons people select our service is because it gives them total control. I don't know which aspect of the course will give you the biggest benefits. Again, notice how this still works with negatives. Don't sign up for this program unless you're ready, because it will give you a lot more business. An example with an if-then structure. If you throw in the aircon, then I'd consider buying it. Other tip-off words which have essentially the same structure as if-then. While the market is in this state, I'm being very careful about where I put my money. As long as you keep us as your exclusive supplier, we'll keep prices stable. We won't take on any more people unless we get that big order. Presuppositions of complex equivalence. This is another form of linkage that people make between different internal representations. The tip-offs are the verb to be in any form or the word means. So what we're doing with complex equivalence is either saying something is the same as something else, hence the name, equivalence, as in time is money, or saying that something means something else or is a sign of something else. They've increased my salary, that means they really value me. Sometimes you get an implied complex equivalence. That last example would still mean the same thing if you said, they've increased my salary, they must really value me, because the that means in the second version is understood. Presuppositions of complex equivalence, when you hear them, give you clues about how people categorize and label the world around them. Similarly, you can use complex equivalence presuppositions to get people to make connections that they hadn't seen before, or assign new meanings to things. If you're feeling confused right now, that means you're taking on board new information, which is part of the process of learning. Notice that although there's an if in that sentence, it's not the same as the if-then of cause and effect. In fact, we're saying that the feeling of confusion is actually an effect of the process of learning, which, if they accept it, redefines confusion in their mind as a good thing. That's it for this week's podcast. See you next time.